Hello, everyone, and welcome to our webinar today, 7 Tips for 7 Days of Testing with Ash Coleman. I want to thank you for joining us, and just a little bit about how is this going to go today. So a little bit of welcome from Toronto Agile community. I am Artita Karai, and on behalf of Toronto Agile community, I want to thank you for joining us on our webinars. With me we have Peter Jake and Paul Henman, 2 other volunteers of our community helping us. So a little bit of housekeeping rules. Attendees will be on mute to avoid any external noises, and you can use the question box to add your question during the presentation. So as we go along, if you see any, if you have any questions, just type it, and we'll take that. Don't wait for the end. A little bit of helping, who's helping us. I want to thank our sponsors. You can see all these brands here that have helped us and continue to help our community with their support, so we can have events like this. So without further ado, I want to introduce to you our speaker for today, Ash Coleman. And Ash, hello.
Hello.
She is joining us from San Francisco. I think you all read her presentation, her bio that we put on our website, so you all know who she is. I just wanted to add a little bit on top of that, that she likes Drake, and that connects her with Toronto, and she likes hats. She's she has some really fun pictures with hats. I didn't put anyone here, but she does. So I don't know what's going on with Drake. Maybe you can talk about that. But here it is, Ash, sharing today with us her 7 tips for 7 days of testing. Ash, I'm going to pass this to you.
Awesome. And
We see you.
Can you see me?
Yes.
Awesome. So yes, yeah, that was a reveal, and I'm so thankful for the opportunity to be here with everyone today. Just a little bit of a background to add to the story that Ardita just presented there. I do love Drake. The story goes that every Black girl that went to college loves Drake, and it stands true with me, so I don't want to break that stereotype whatsoever. He's the closest ties that I have to Toronto, and I love it. So if Toronto is anything like Drake, then I'm sure I'm missing out on a great thing not being in your presence today. But I'm happy to be calling in from San Francisco. So yes, and my love of hats. I mean, you'll find me in a number of head wraps and hats and things like that, all over Instagram and Facebook and even Twitter sometimes when you see me speaking. Oftentimes my hair will either be an extravagant color or style, or I'll be wearing a hat or a head wrap, and it's a form of expression I have, and I love it so much. So thank you for those details, and hopefully that helps you get to know me a little bit better as I talk about some of my experiences here in the Agile and in the testing community. So yeah, let's get started. As Ardita already said, my name is Ash Coleman. I am here in San Francisco, and I moved here about 7 months ago. I moved from New York City, of which I lived for the last 10 years approximately, and that's kind of where my testing experience began. As you can see on this slide that I drew for this occasion, I was a former chef, and so I was a chef for about 16 years and loved every second of it. Loved every second of it. I was catering, I was making wedding cakes and doing a lot of fun things with food. And even to this day, you can still find me in a kitchen doing something crafty and playing around with food. But for a number of various reasons, including a new allergy to gluten that was exposed a number of years ago, to just all around food sensitivities and just a change of lifestyle, my craft moved from the artistic expression of food to engineering. And that's something that a lot of people always ask, hey, like, how did you get from chefing to engineering? And quite honestly, I felt like it was kind of a seamless experience. My brother, when I was a kid, he and I would play around with computers and build them. We were from very humble upbringing, and so we didn't have the means to go out and just purchase the new technology, so we built it from scraps that we would find. And so with that, that kind of charged up my desire to interact with computers and engineering and whatnot, and I have absolutely my brother to thank on this one. But cutting through that story and presenting to you today, yes, my name is Ash. You can find me on Twitter at AshColeman30, and the screen name Quack Quack. That's a story in itself, but I'll save that one for later. So to talk a little bit about that experience in testing, I'm going to take you not too far back, not to the beginning, but about a year ago, almost to the day, really. I was working full-time in an organization, and it was an agile organization. I had been there to help move along some processes that they were trying to establish within the org, and it was a great opportunity. However, eventually we parted ways, and I decided to start my own consultancy. And this was something that was more of an adventure type calling than anything else. It was something where I wanted to explore and see, like, what can I do that's different but also the same? How can this be a little bit more on my terms? How can I be of use and stretch my skills and do all these other things? And so I quit my job, I started this consultancy, and right away I found myself presented with an opportunity of a contract. And it was really happenstance how it happened. I was just getting established as someone unemployed and trying to figure out how to navigate this consultancy space. And I got an email from a friend asking, hey, listen, I have a friend who's looking for a tester. Do you have anyone in mind? And I said, quite honestly, I just quit my job and I'm available to test. So please pass on my information. And that was kind of a lucky draw then, because at that time, again, I didn't know what I was doing. I didn't know where I was going. And quite honestly, I hadn't had many examples besides like very well-known names of doing consultancy in the testing space. So I was very lucky to receive this email, phone call, and be presented with a contract. So I go to this company and start talking to them, interview, have the whole, initiation process. And this company is a startup, so they were just getting off the ground. They had been in production for about a year and hadn't really had many materials out in the public for such a long time, but they had a product that they were very passionate about. And with this passion, they realized over time that they needed to do a complete rebuild of their site. And so that's where I came in. They said, okay, well, we have 3 weeks that we want to work with a tester to be able to help us to understand where we stand and then move us into production. Now, this was an interesting thing because, of course, as all of us would say, we'd like to be involved in the process a lot earlier than 3 weeks before launch. But unfortunately, that's not always the space that you're writing in when you're a consultant, and sometimes even in your own organizations. And so it can be a little bit difficult to say, like, okay to this, but at the same time, it was a paid job, it was offered to me, and I saw it as an opportunity. So I said, awesome, let's do this. So I went in for my first day and I was really excited and started talking to everyone, getting to know the people, talking mostly to the CTO and just figuring out, like, okay, what are we up to? Great products, great people, engineers are awesome. And again, it was a situation of we want to launch in 3 weeks. But it was funny, the transition that happened over the next few hours were this. As I started to get to know the technology that I was going to be working with and get to know the people, I started getting some information from marketing. And the information was, oh, there's some movement going on in the industry that we're working in, and it's looking like we want to stay competitive. We want to launch the same time as some of these other news items that are being dropped in 1 week. So we're going to have to move our date all the way up. Drop 3 weeks, we're going 1 week. And so at this time, you can imagine what I was thinking, and hopefully this picture gives you a little bit of a descriptor. 3 weeks, I felt a little more comfortable with that because that is something that's absolutely known to me in other environments that I've been in. Now, this 1 week situation or scenario, not so often does it happen, and usually I'm familiar with the technology to be able to jump in really quickly and move. So let's talk about some of the things that I went through during this 1 week process to get the technology out the door. So the first day, I went in, like I said, I got this news sounding like 1 week, and that was the end of the week. It was probably a Friday, I believe, either Thursday or Friday. And I was starting to actually work with the team on Monday. So Monday comes along, I walk in the office. I'd already gotten to know a few of the people that were there, but I really wanted to understand some other things around them. Now, this is where the context begins. Because I was brand new to this organization and didn't quite know many of the things that were going on, I really had to do my due diligence in figuring out what the context of the site was. So initially I started with talking to the team members, right? What are you engineering? What are you working on? What are the most difficult parts of your job? How are you finding a lot of the errors that you are encountering thus far? What is going on within your process from development to production? Because at this time they had already had a site that was standing, but they were doing a complete rebuild. And so I knew that they were veterans to this process already, and we're just trying to get some things out of the door. So I talked to them, I established a plan with them, recognized like, hey, listen, I'm just joining the team and I want to be of assistance to you. But this drove me to another bigger question here. Have you ever worked with testers before? This is a really big question for new teams that you're on, as well as with maybe new team members that are joining your team at the organization that you're in or in the job that you're working with, right? Testers work in a very specific manner, all of which are varying within the community, but at the same time, our objective is to assist in bringing to light some of the pitfalls that might be within the code. So with that, you have to ask people questions like, hey, how do you like working and being interrupted? Because as a tester, we know there are a lot of questions involved in our job. We ask questions to figure out context, we ask questions to figure out risk, we ask questions to figure out the status or the state of the technology that's being built, etc. And so understanding people's temperament with working with testers is going to be a really huge win for you. Not only that, what is the entire picture of what are you working with, right? When I went in, I asked, what process are you working with currently? And the answer, I feel like, is a really buzzwordy scenario in technology these days, which is agile. But I don't want to downplay what agile can mean for a number of different organizations. For this particular one, I would say we were agile-ish. In other words, we had the idea of what agile could do for us, but we weren't necessarily working within the confines of agile behavior. And so, with that, a little bit of coaching might have been necessary or encouraged in this particular situation. So knowing that that might be one of the areas we would have a difficult time with, it was time to analyze, like, how can this be a benefit to us to implement any sort of process? And is now really the time to do it? Or are we just in a situation where we need to get through things and work about process later? And so working with the team to understand where we stood was a huge win for us. Getting to know the developers, getting to know their process, the things that they could provide, etc., was going to be very helpful moving forward. Knowing that agile-ish was their objective currently and their process moving forward helped me to establish where I could jump in and where we could lead this process onto production. So the next thing that I would say would be a tip would be, what do they expect, right? So I got in there, I understood the team. Got to know them, got to figure out what their process was, how they were doing their work beforehand, how their process was working, what technologies they were using, bugs they were encountering, etc. Now it's time to talk about what do they expect. And by they, I don't necessarily mean the development team, the engineers, front end, back end, etc. I mostly mean the business owners, right? We don't always have the opportunity to be in the same building with the people who are considered the business owners, the ones calling the shots or making and architecting the product that they want to produce. And so this could be a little bit of a challenge, be them whether they're in the building or not. This particular instance that I was in, luckily they were in the building. We were an incredibly small team. Our entire team was about 30 people. We fit in one room in Soho, New York City, and it was lovely to be able to make contact with everyone that was in the building. Though we were in the same room, everyone has a different idea of what's going on. As far as I was concerned, I looked at the materials that I had, which were the next step that they had brought me to, which was a Trello board that was lovely and kind of descriptive of the things that they were trying to get implemented for the rebuild. So I went through these and I realized a number of these tickets were very vague. They didn't have details. I'm sure none of you have ever experienced this before, so I'm just going to go ahead and write it off as a one-off incident. But they had a number of tickets that were less than descriptive of anything that was desired. Of course, the team had been working together for a few months at that time, so they understood amongst themselves what was being asked for. But as a tester, someone coming in to fortify some of the work that was going on, it was necessary for me to understand, like, hey, where do I stand with this? What's going on? Like, what's being expected of me when I come in here and I'm assisting with the testing, right? What am I working with? What do the business owners expect? As they're throwing ideas over the wall or putting them in Trello, so a visual idea of throwing over the wall, are they being descriptive enough for us to understand what it is that they want? And quite honestly, I don't know that a ticket sometimes can be that descriptive, especially if you're just getting into the mix with the team. So I would say, figure out what it is that they want. Talk with people, understand what the requirements are, get the vision, see what they see, understand what their ideas are. Ask all the initiating questions that you need to in order to understand what they have in mind. Now, just a side note from the story and just a descriptor about this slide. Not sure how familiar everyone is with San Francisco, but San Francisco is a rather foggy place. It's a little cool on most days. If you're ever up to nothing and you want some excitement, follow Carl the Fog on Twitter. Great little additive, has a personality of its own, and quite honestly just follows the trend of the fog that's here in the city. So that's just an aside. So this brings me to my next point. As you get to know what is expected of you, realize that the possibilities here are endless. So I did a little bit of an experiment about a year ago for another talk that I was giving around the Agile process. And this was mostly in regards to requirements that were being asked and acceptance criteria of a feature that's being built out. Oftentimes, we go into a job with very specific ideas in mind. We're all individual people. We have experiences that build us to where we are, the things that we imagine, the things that we build. And so this brings me to this point. The experiment that I conducted was I went on Twitter and I asked people, draw me a picture of a house. And that was the simple instruction. There was no additional information given. Maybe I included some words such as it has walls, a roof, a door, and windows, right? But I didn't really go into detail. I just said, draw me a picture of a house, and I tweeted it. As I started to receive answers back, I noticed something. Every single image that was drawn of a house that I received back was different. It was different. That's because everyone's experience with the house is different. If you imagine the house that you live in, you could probably imagine that it's not anything like the house of someone who is even your neighbor, right? Unless maybe you live in military housing or apartments that are very similar. The reality is even inside, the decor can be very different according to personality and lifestyles and things like that. And so this is something I really want to drive home in this point about getting acceptance criteria or receiving information and ideas from business to development. We all have a very different idea of what every individual acceptance criteria means. If someone is asking you to build a house, it is to your best interest to get the details of what that means. Because the reality is as varied as we are in people, the ideas are just as infinite. And so the hope is that as we communicate with one another and ask these questions and really start to dive into what context these people are trying to pursue when producing certain technology, what is it that they're getting at? Some other beneficial questions are, who's living in the house? Sticking with that house analogy, right? Who's living in the house? Is this a house for a family? Or is this a house for a single person? Is this a condo, etc.? All of these things should be considered because the end user is the objective. but the idea is within the business. So as you start to build that context of what it is you're working with, the tip here is to be very thorough with your details. Understand exactly what's being asked so that you know exactly what to build. And there are no questions at the end of the day, whether it's the house on the top or the house on the bottom. So this brings me to my next tip, that of the diagnosis. So we spent a lot of time talking about context already, right? What is the context of this technology that we're building? Who are we building it for? Who has the ideas in mind? What is the vision? And so we've got this understanding at least of what it is that we're working with, right? Hopefully at this time, we're not burning up too many days, considering the time is only 7 days, of building up this context. And there are more in-person conversations or emails or however you need to get that information to you in a time that will give you enough time to consider all the work that you have in front of you. And so this is going to be the crafting or the architecting of that work, the diagnoses, right? Now that we understand the context, it's time to take the initial look into the code. And so you spend maybe a day or so really doing that. Again, keep in close contact with your development team. Keep in close contact with business as you're working through whatever user flows are on that technology, starting to ask questions, right? Is this broken? Like, is this expected behavior? Is this not? As I'm going through this, this feels a little odd, right? These are kind of what has been classified as innate behavior of testers, or the curiosity skill that is built up through time in testing, right? How are we staying curious about the technology and understanding where it stands? Because a lot of this is going to determine how you move going forward. If you're finding that a number of things are broken, the question to then ask yourself and to dive into is, are these all being caused by the same thing? These are conversations, again, that you can have with your development team, or the hope is that you can dive into the code and really start to see it yourself, using those console tools and really seeing like what sort of errors are being responded or are being given to me so that I can understand how to respond and move forward. Assessing the situation is the tip here. Understanding what are the highest priorities, what can wait, right? I have a story about a team member that I worked with a number of years ago who was very excited about every single bug that they found. They would go into the code, they would look initially and they'd say, oh my goodness, this is a huge bug, I found it, it took me a long time to find it, and not only that, I've got a big one here. And they'd take it back to development, and development would see, and they're like, okay, this is going to take a while for us to fix, and they'd give the information on how they could get the bug fixed. But then the conversation with business usually was the last one, or in this particular case was the last one. And they found out that the bug that they had found was very low in the priority of getting things out the door. That's not to say the excitement shouldn't still be there. It's to say when you're considering all of the things that are in front of you or assessing the situation altogether, how are you weighing each individual find? Are you weighing it based on your own personal experience with finding the bug and putting in the energy to extract the information about it? Or are you weighing it against the priority of the business needs? If it's something like the color of a button, it's sometimes not as important to work on over other issues that could prevent someone from utilizing the technology altogether. Now, if the color of the button prevented people from understanding the instructions by way of accessibility concerns, then we can talk about priority on a higher scale. But just overall, assessing the situation is going to help you to be able to make a plan moving forward as you prioritize things and see what can wait. And so we get to this testing aspect, right? So at this point, I'm about 4 days in, probably 3.5 days in, and I start really diving in there and testing, right? So I've assessed the situation, talked to business, I know what they're expecting, I see what's going on, and now it's time to start looking at what previous issues have been found. This is a little bit more on the context area, but this is going to be more you utilizing your testing skills to see what already exists within all of the files created or all the tickets created in your bug tracking software, right? So in this particular situation, I worked with this team and they had a Trello board that was endless. This thing was huge, it was massive, and had zero control. Now, a very far stretch from the ideal situation of a tester, which is you go in, you see the board, you say, okay, this is all manageable, and I can get right in and I can start testing here. I'm going to test these features and I'm going to test these bugs. And it's plain and simple like that. Unfortunately, that wasn't my situation, and hopefully it's rarely yours, where you go in and you see a Trello board that's massive. And it has so many files in it, some of which are duplicates. They're coming from many different sources. People's word usage of how to describe the reproductive steps are very varying. And you don't have an idea really of what's going on. So you start trying to reproduce some of these issues. You start trying to dive in and see, okay, how can I organize myself, right? So you've already diagnosed the situation, assessed it to see from your own personal user experience what is going on there. Now it's time to see what other people have found. Because the reality is as you've started to understand the development team, you started to know what stands out to them as being maybe a misstep. With my particular case, the development team was really great with finding how they could better architect the code altogether, but had very little attention paid to the user experience. And I don't blame them, because their job was to get code built and produce a product. And that's awesome they did that. So my job now was to go through all of these files and to figure out, okay, what is still occurring as an issue here? Is this really an issue? What's going on? And so we're going to talk a little bit about priority now. And I think that this is something that is more concerning for people, and maybe something to pay a little bit more attention to than has been given credit for, right? So I'm in this testing environment, and I'm looking at all the things in front of me, and I'm going through all these Trello tickets of which are not prioritized in any way, shape, or form. And I start talking to development, and I start talking to business, and I realize everything that is an issue is a fire, right? I don't know if any of you have ever had that situation before, but when you go into a situation where everything is a fire, the question is, which one do you put out first, right? Now, understanding prioritization, everyone knows that not everything can be a fire. Maybe this one is sparks, this one's a little bit of smoke, this one's full flames, and this one's just the perfect setup for a fire in the future, right? And so as we start looking at what we have, the question is, what exactly is going to make the cut? Out of all these fires, we have to start asking the questions that really break down what prioritization means for each individual site. So this is the next step I'm going to talk about, right? What exactly makes the cut? How can we prioritize these things? Again, going back to that story with the button color, we're sitting there saying, like, what is the actual impact that we have here, right? So you have this one button that does not work. That presents a higher impact than possibly a button that has the wrong color. So you're going to have to start breaking these down into those terms so that people understand the risks going out, right? So as we start looking at the list, we see that we have a varying number of issues. Our job then is to draw a line and say, all right, with the time that I have remaining, so for me, it was about 3 days at this point. With the time I have remaining, which is 3 days, all of these issues are apparent. But here's the line. I can only get through 17 issues out of 36, or whatever number that might look like for you. And this is talking about the compromise aspect. We'll get into that a little bit later. But just imagining what a list looks like for you, and the hope is to have the most prioritized items at the top, your P0s, your P1s, the ones that you cannot push to production having, because you know as a user, but also as a tester, that it will stall the actual objective of the software. If you're working with an e-com site, and the objective is to be able to sell items to your user base, and they're not able to get through the checkout process, clearly that item needs to be prioritized higher than something a little more minuscule, such as maybe this image isn't showing up. Now clearly, if it's an e-com site, you're going to want all the images to show up. But this is the time where we start to realize, hey, this one carries a little bit more weight because it keeps us from earning whatever income or whatever revenue that we're aiming for in order to get these things out the door. And so we have to start having those conversations, staging them as opportunities and impacts, rather than all the things are on fire. Because as far as I'm concerned, everything that everyone's working on will be a fire if it's not working in the way that they imagine. But how does this impact the business? And that's the question you should ask, and be asking those that you're working with as far as what exactly makes the cut. So after you've done this job of really building out the list of issues that you have, we're going to talk about delegation here. One of the things that I found to be most helpful in situations where I'm the only tester on a team, working with a team perhaps that has never had a tester before, or even just working at a fast pace such as launching in 7 days, is figuring out how to get as many hands on the testing aspect as possible. Now, some of the technologies that I've used in the past can be, Jira, Trello, a number of bug tracking devices. But one of my most prized possessions when it comes to architecting the work of testers or creating a test plan is mind maps, right? So I use a mind map to go through and really figure out, like, what is it that I'm looking at and what do the issues present themselves as far as testing is concerned. And I see that as a way to get myself through the testing process to production, right? So how can I get all of my teammates involved? One thing that I've started to do is to really advocate for testing with my team, especially if they've never worked with testers before. Start to ask them questions such as like, hey, tell me a little bit about yourself and your interests here. What do you do? Understanding a little bit of what people do on your team is going to help you to hopefully be able to match them with tasks that they can get through in order to provide some feedback around the quality of the site that you're producing. Now, an amazing question was asked to me last time we were talking about this delegation process, and that was, would you have a developer who developed a certain code base test their code? And I have 2 responses to that. One is, yes, they already should be testing their code, because that's the hope. All developers should have some aspect of testing within their protocol, where they go through, maybe it is PR checks with other developers, maybe it's creating unit tests, maybe it's just going through and seeing how it performs on the front end if they're a front end developer or whatnot. And that's the hope. But that might not always be the case. But if we can encourage that sort of advocacy of testing, then that could help you infinitely. The other thing is, if people are developing the code base, should they test it? The answer is no. But the hope is that they're interacting with the software enough to be able to say, I'm familiar with this, and my skills are this, so maybe I can use those 2 things to test this other area of code, right? Because we want to diminish any area of bias that could happen with people testing their own developed software. And so as a tester, of course, we come through, and the hope is that we're objective enough to be able to look past a number of the things we know about the code to be able to just dive in and really test. But that's not always the case with people that you're recruiting for the work. And so be a little crafty with how you delegate this work. Give a set of tests to a person who might just be really keen on design, and have them go through an entire process or user flow and give feedback about how that felt, how the experience was. And that can really help you to assess things such as, oh, maybe our checkout process is too long, or maybe this shouldn't be there. This image looks wrong. This, whatever feedback that you can get from people with the skills that they have is going to benefit you based on their feedback. So go ahead, put your test plan out there and see what people can provide you in the feedback that they give as they go through it with you. The hope is that you get enough information, at least that's surface level, that you're able to look at it and say, okay, I at least know the bases are down. Someone's gone through the user flows and they show me that they're correct, or that they're at least functioning, that they feel great using it, and that it's a product that they would happily use out in the wild, right? And so that's a huge part of your job, just validating a lot of the code that you have and saying like, okay, people who are familiar with the way that it should look and the way that it should feel have gone through it and have given feedback such as it looks good. So now your job is to focus on a little bit more of the in-depth testing. So we're going to talk about it a little bit. A little detail behind this image here. I love karaoke. It's one of my favorite things to do. First thing I do when I get the mic is I check it, right? Now we've already talked about the initial checks and the overall feedback from your team members about things that they've tested themselves. But some of the things that we're going to talk about in this particular time, and the next tip that we're going to talk about, is the deep dive into the code, right? So now that you know that things are decent surface level, it's time to really get into those other methodologies of testing. And so it's time for you to assess which testing methods are going to be the most beneficial for you, right? Because not all of them are going to produce results that are going to help you realize, like, oh, hey, we need to get this fixed in 2 days. Of course, you want to recognize the most in-depth testing processes first, because the chances are those are going to be the highest engineered processes. And this is something I learned with this particular story. So as I was coming down to a few days, I realized, okay, I've only got a few more days to do this. Let me start getting into some of the in-depth testing. Let me get into performance testing. Let me get into the deep dive, like really get into the code, security testing, etc. And I realized, wow, these jobs are a little bigger than I would imagine being comfortable with at this period of the game, right? So something that I learned that I'm going to pass on to you is, as you are testing these things, make sure you're testing the highest priority items and the most in-depth testing processes first. Because the chance is, if it's big to test, it's big to re-engineer, right? So if you're finding bugs within this code, it might not just be a syntax error. It might be something a lot bigger than that. And so give your development team time to work, especially in crunch time like this, where your feedback is given in time for them to be able to help along the work and fix the bugs that are the biggest. That's the tip that I'll give in this specific situation. Now, other than that, this was a time where I started to really realize what testing was about. And it's funny that I had been doing it for so long and started to really understand, like, people who don't work with testers every day may not know certain aspects of it. I found a quote. It's that good software testing is a challenging intellectual process. It is. It takes a lot of mind and time and process all together. You really have to understand where you stand and where you're going in order to get things together and out the door on time. And so as you're doing these deeper dives, you're finding answers, you're finding understanding about the software, and you're recognizing the priority of things as you're going. The hope is that you're doing this in a way that gives feedback to be able to fix issues in time, but also to move forward after the launch of the site. So you can go back and say, like, all of these discoveries here are where we're going to be working moving forward. Now, in the Agile world, this would just go right into the backlog, right? All of these tickets that are not prioritized for this particular launch goes right in the backlog. Now, this team, again, I was working with, we were still using Trello at that point, so they just went somewhere. But the hope is that as you really deep dive into that, you can start to understand the technology that you're testing and you're using so that you can have that feedback later on when testing is a little less stressed when it comes to time. So I'm going to summarize a few things that we talked about, right? Know what you're working with. That is the #1 tip that I would say. Know what you're working with. Know the people, know the process, know the technology, the engineers, the business owners, the project manager, etc. Know them because they're going to be a resource unto you as you're moving forward. Then, know what they expect. Ask the hard questions. What are users supposed to be getting out of this experience with this technology? Are they supposed to just be getting a delivered item to their home, or are they getting an entire experience that is a lifestyle change for them? That's something I had to start realizing with some of the gigs that I got as a consultant, is that sometimes the interaction with technology is the experience, right? It's what helps sell the product. And so we need to know those things and know what they expect in order to get that feedback into the development process and test it and out to production. 3, know what is expected of you, right? What are you coming in there for? What are you getting done? Plain and simple. Know what the acceptance criteria is driving so that we can get the right product out the door. And then assess the situation. 4, right? See where you stand, see what you're working with, see how you can move forward. Making that plan is going to be imperative when it comes to getting this product out the door. So long as you can assess the situation, you can make hard calls such as, this might not fit, this might, let's move forward. So that brings us to 5, prioritize, right? Stage these conversations in a way that you can build a priority that is the most necessary in order to get things out the door. Then delegate. You're only 2 set of hands, or 1 set of hands. You have 2 hands, right? How much can you do? You can only do so much. And so being able to delegate some of the clearer work or the easier work or the surface level work to other people within the team is going to help you to be able to cover some bases that you might not have the opportunity to based on the time you have. And then 7 is test, test, test until there's no testing left. And as testers, we know testing is never finished. And so the hope is that we can continue getting the most valuable test work out the door first, the most feedback to our development team and business owners first, so that the smaller aspects of testing, the stretch testing, and all those things that provide us information about how to make the software stronger moving forward can be thrown in the backlog, and it can be something that we can look back on. So this little diagram here is something I like to call the 3 C's, and this is something that I'm constantly thinking about when I'm talking about priority with teams, and that's conversation, clarity, and compromise, right? Have those conversations that help you understand where you stand, that gains you the context to be able to move forward. Then make sure everything is clear. Make sure everyone's on the same page with what is expected and what's going out the door. And then compromise a bit, because the reality is that the picture is going to be a lot bigger than you have the ability to paint. So make sure that when you're doing all these things, you're having those conversations, you're making sure everyone is on the same page with you. The last thing that you need is to work so hard over 7 days, if that is the time constraint that you're under, produce so much great stuff, get things out the door, and then realize what you've been working with is not what they've been expecting. So make sure that all conditions are clear. And then compromise a little. Again, this is about you explaining, if you want great quality and you don't have the time, you're going to have to put in the money, right? And this is what this diagram talks about. And it's a common conversation that's had with business and test and development. If you've got the money and you want the quality, it's going to take the time. Now, in this particular instant, we didn't have the time, therefore the money, all those hours that we were working, and the quality was high, we got it out the door, right? And so these are all the things that I have to say as far as getting a product out the door in 7 days. If that is all the time you have, and that's all that you can do, then the hope is that you do it the most efficient, you gain the context, and you can get it out the door. Any questions?
Awesome. No questions so far. I think people were just observing your beautiful pictures and the beautiful story. So I'm going to give everyone a bit of time to think about questions. But I can start with one.
Sure.
How did you get the developers into helping you when you said about them helping you with testing and you delegated the work? So one tip you said that they can help you test on areas where they haven't developed. But what was that about? How did developers feel to move into the testing world?
Right. So this is something, every developer, of course, is different, just as every person is different. And in this particular situation, I think the stress was on everyone to work well together. That's not always the case, and I've been on teams where it's difficult to work with developers, but in this particular instance, the open door was pair programming and pair testing. And so that's probably my #1 recommendation for engaging developers in the work of testing. And the adverse, getting testers more acquainted with the code by way of pair programming with their developers to understand a little bit better what it is that they're thinking as they're coding, but also understanding things over time, such as where you're finding the most bugs from particular developers. I know that the longer that I'm on a team, the easier I can identify where bugs are coming from because I know the developers that are on it. And that's not to say that these developers are problematic. It's to say that we are habitual people, and sometimes we miss a class, or sometimes we miss, label something, or we don't put the correct tag on it. And just identifying kind of their habits over time through pair programming and pair testing, it's easier to get that feedback and to engage them in the work.
Great. Another question just came up. How do you go about gathering quality metrics?
Gathering quality metrics, heavens. So on this particular product itself, that was not even a question, right? That was something that we didn't even have an opportunity to look into, mostly because there wasn't a real system of tracking that we had. Now, if this is an agile process that's going forward, that you have the time to develop the team, really coach them in the agile way, then I would say your biggest bet is going to be setting up the metrics by way of a bug tracking software. So the team that I'm working with now, we use Jira, and so we can find a lot of those metrics there based on labeling and based on all of the things that classify each bug or story or epic. And so those are things that take diligence within the team to be able to architect within the process. And so in hindsight, it would have been great to see that in numbers, but considering the situation, we didn't have that opportunity. After that initial launch, I went back in and implemented Pivotal for that team so that they could come across some of these metrics, so that they could be better in recognizing where they stood when it came to bugs that we returned, and then also just the overall rituals of Scrum, right? Just sitting there saying, like, what's in our backlog? What do we want to build? Where are the bugs? Like, what's going on here? And so a lot of that technology is going to be helpful, but it also depends on what type of metrics you're trying to get back. And so there's many different technologies for that as well that I've used over different teams to figure out what it is that speaks best to them, because sometimes it's not about bugs for people, it's about stories or epics, or sometimes it's not even about any of those things, it's about end result products. So figuring out what it is that they want to be communicated to them, and then figuring out the best technology to do such.
Maybe quickly, is there any quality metric that you definitely want to see no matter what type of project it is? We have some questions waiting, but maybe just quickly on this topic.
Yeah, no. So I would say, again, it all depends on the goals, but for me, one of the biggest things that I like to see is proper time paid to velocity, right? Understanding how much work people are getting out and when, because I think that that's one of the easiest ways for me to be able to contribute to a team with getting things out the door, right? Understanding like how much is going to be coming in so that I can plan an appropriate test plan, make those cases, and then move forward. And so that metric is probably going to be my number one when it comes to working with numbers and figures on a team. It's our velocity.
Okay. So I'm moving on to the next question. If the client deadline has stayed at 3 weeks, what would you have used the time for? What might you have learned less well?
That's a good question.
Of course, it's Amitai.
Pardon?
Amitai asked this question.
Oh, hi, Amitai. Yeah, so what I probably would have learned less is the context of the team and the product, to be completely honest. I think that sometimes as engineers, we jump in there and we just have a job to do, so we do it. But when you are in a crunch situation, there's less time to procrastinate, maybe. it was all about understanding the end point and the vision. It was all about understanding my teammates, understanding the context of all the things that I was doing. And so in traditional onboarding process, I found when I have a number of weeks to onboard onto a product, of course, I take my time. I have meetings with such and who and with what products certain times throughout that period. But it's not something where I sit down in a room and I'm like, hey, my name is Ash and I want to get to know all of you very closely and very quickly. And so I would say in times where there's more time, it's almost a sacrifice of context, where there isn't an urgency to really dive in and understand what it is that you're working with, when you have more time to just relax and be able to learn it as you go.
Okay. Another one coming, next one. Was it difficult to ensure completeness of testing with parent-child tickets for stories?
Yes. Yes, it was. And the reason being, again, with this particular scenario, it was because everything was on fire. Now, we got through the major P0s, P1s, but working with all the, parent tickets, or I'm sorry, child tickets of these larger stories, sometimes there were negotiations that were happening such as, okay, this is not something that's a priority for us. And the reality about it is when you're working with software that has not been tested at all, and you realize your skill set is very thorough, you're going to find quite a number of things that are associated with these stories. And so you're going to go in and you're going to create these bugs, and these bugs are going to exist, and getting those complete are going to be difficult because they are associated with a story, but they have very low priority. And so when you're in these rush times of testing, your job is just to document, and you've got all these things down as far as like what's going on with each individual story. But then the priority changes. The story needs to go, but these small aspects such as like the pixelation or the color or, this small little error that's happening on the back end is not really something to focus on. It's for longer term development.
Any tips on how to handle those going forward?
Pardon?
Any tips on how to handle those?
Absolutely. So whichever team you're working on, establish a way of building the backlog, right? So this team, it was taking a bunch of tickets out of a Trello board and moving it over to Pivotal in an organized manner where things weren't getting lost. And so however you want to build out that process as far as like, are we changing these to another story? Are we putting them in the giant epic? And there was a question on Twitter yesterday, I believe, where it was talking about Agilists moving in the direction of, do you just have one major epic where all bugs get dropped? And is that something that's a growing trend? And the reality is I think it depends on the team that you're working with. I personally do not prefer that method. I would like to have more organization around the board that I'm working with and the issues that I'm finding. So the tip I would say about that is to establish what organization looks like within your team for your bug tracking software. Figure out how to orchestrate all of those loose end bugs in a way that stay within a sprint or within the backlog in an organized way where they don't fall through the cracks, right? Always making sure you're, there's this concept in stocking food items where it's like first in, first out. You always want to try and get those bugs that you're finding first, even though they're lower priority. Sprinkle those into whatever high-end sprints that you have so that you're making sure you keep track of them, but categorize them in a way that makes sense for your organization.
Good. And one more question. So it's from Martin. He says that Ash mentioned she would have used Pivotal. Is that correct? And what metrics does this tool generate?
So Pivotal, I have used Pivotal before. In this particular team, I did use it. It does, let me think here. I will actually open it. So Pivotal gives the amount of stories that you have. I don't believe it's, so Jira is probably the best when it comes to getting those metrics back. Pivotal, I believe, was very baseline, and that was really appropriate for this team because we weren't really diving into those numbers. But it gave numbers of issues, and it also gave a really great burn down chart of what you were getting through. So it kind of helped you work with velocity. It has an automatic process of moving tickets to and from different sprints as you work through them. And so we were able to really establish like what our velocity was over whatever week sprints that we had, and build that into our process to understand what kind of work we could get out the door. Now, again, this was a startup company that I was working with, so they were not necessarily focused on process 100%, but I think that as the development team, we really used it to help business understand how much we could work with, even though sometimes priorities changed and we did not work with that very often any longer.
Sounds great. We don't have any more questions. Oh, no, we do. What's the best way to assess test coverage?
Sorry?
What is the best way to assess test coverage?
Mind mapping. That's going to help you be very transparent about what the possibilities are with testing, and you can break it out however you want. There are so many different ways people have utilized mind mapping, but if it's a very basic test plan that you're trying to orchestrate, I've gone page by page on some products. You can go page by page, you can go feature by feature. I guess it just depends on what you're trying to get out the door, or if this is for documentation purposes, or what your overall objective is. But as someone who's going in the, I'll use the example of the story that I just told. For this particular 5-page application, I went page by page since there were not tickets about feature by feature. And so page by page allowed me to really build out what the architect looked like, and then from each different feature off of the main page, I was able to build out a test plan around those.
For people that are not probably familiar with mind mapping, is any tool you can point there so they can start playing with it?
Xmind is a good one. Okay. There's also, I believe, Toggle is another that's more for group process or group mind mapping. And if, pardon?
Mind map.
Map. Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yep. And if you just Google mind map, you'll find a number of different free trials that you can use and kind of find which one works best for you.
Sounds great. Yeah, we don't have any more questions, so I think that's it. Thank you, Ash, for sharing your story with us.
Thank you.
That hopefully has given some ideas to some of our community members and how to take a quick assignment on testing.
Yeah, and if you ever have any questions, you can find me on Twitter, AshColeman30.
Wonderful. For everyone that is still with us, just before we close, I want to remind quickly about our Toronto Agile Conference coming up on November 7th. The program is ready. The registrations are in full speed. So you want to go quickly and get your ticket. The program is really covering 4 big tracks that are about the technical practices, the process, the product, people, and leadership. Our keynote speaker is Joshua Kirievsky, and he's going to talk about modern Agile. So we expect to have a really great conference and our biggest so far. As usual, we really want to hear from you. Send us your feedback or suggestions on future topics. Stay in touch with us through our website, our newsletter. Please subscribe, and our Twitter. Follow us on Twitter at Toronto Agile. And that was it for today. Thank you, everyone, and looking forward to see you next time. Thank you, Ash.
Thank you.